We may be watching the end of TV news as we know it, folks, at least old school ones. Now look, people like Joe Rogan, they're becoming the go-to for news content for audiences now. People are turning to online influencers, to YouTubers and streamers, right? And this industry shift spells big changes for the big corporate media, the old way of doing things. And this is in addition to the extra legal headaches also that they're now facing as President-elect Donald Trump is launching lawsuits against a very large number of them, actually. And meanwhile, the food lobby is now planning its whole move to counter Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s plans to remake food in America. RFK Jr. has outlined a plan to go after what he regards as harmful chemicals and additives in our food. And now we're seeing some pushback on it. Lobbyists from some of these food companies that could be affected by his plans are now working out ways to defend their products against him. I'll be talking about these stories and more today, so let's dive into it. Now, first off, folks, a new age of streaming news is now starting. We are entering a new age of news. And the old guard of TV news stations, well, they're facing some real challenges. Younger audiences in particular, they're turning to streamers, they're turning to podcasts, they're turning to social media for their news. About 40% of them, in fact. And overall with Americans, like 20%. Now, we've seen Joe Rogan, a lot of other hosts online become, kind of gaining viewership, let's say, to understate it in a way. But this shift was actually reflected in the past election. President-elect Donald Trump chose to sit down with many of these new media personalities instead of going the traditional route with cable TV news for, the long-form interviews. It was mostly these smaller YouTubers and independent journalists, right? And Trump made appearances on online shows like the Joe Rogan Experience, the Lex Fridman podcast, Theo Vaughn. He also did live streams of social media influencers like Logan Paul. And Vice President Kamala Harris, she did the same thing, actually. Remember when she did Call Her Daddy? Remember that? These appearances demonstrate how the industry is shifting. And interesting now, Comcast is considering spinning off cable news networks as it faces falling viewership. This is their official press release. Have a look at this. Comcast Corporation says announced its intent to create a new publicly traded company comprised of a strong portfolio of NBC Universal's cable television networks, including USA Network, CNBC, MSNBC, Oxygen, E, Sci-Fi, and the Golf Channel. Now look, here's a bit more on this from Yahoo Finance. It notes that it would only include its cable properties. It would not include its NBC broadcast or stream platform Peacock. Ross Benes, principal analyst at eMarketer, said a spin-off would actually make sense for the company and said, quote, spinning cable networks into their own company will make it easier for Comcast to cleave off its TV properties and then sell them. And it's that Comcast profits are driven by its internet service provider, its ISP, if you have Comcast cable internet maybe, right? And it notes as well that other multi-channel video programming distributors have pulled back their TV ambitions, and it would make sense for Comcast to do the same. They said dividing the TV networks from the rest of the company will allow them to more clearly show growth in their ISP business, internet service provider. And it's a write-down on the TV networks would not be surprising. What does that mean? Well, look, in other words, it seems that the dropping viewership on a lot of these big TV networks is making Comcast as an entire company look bad. And so separating out these underperforming assets and putting them into a new company will actually make the company itself look better because its shares for stock, shareholders won't be getting dragged down by these, badly performing businesses. There's also been some talk also of these networks and how they could go up for sale. In fact, there have been reports that Comcast is looking to sell MSNBC and Oxygen Network as well. Business Insider also alleges it says that this could trigger other cable TV owners to do the same. Meaning, we could be watching the beginning of this. This is not likely the end of it. We could be watching the end of these big corporate media and what they used to represent. This is what we're watching happen right now. Now, it notes here, this is Business Insider, it says one of the country's biggest cable TV companies does not want its cable networks anymore And would you like them? That's the pitch Comcast is making Wednesday as it announces plans to split off almost all its cable TV networks into a new company. And they know that Comcast is getting rid of its basic cable networks for the same reason everyone who owns basic cable networks would like to get rid of their cable networks. They have limited business prospects because the number of people paying for and watching cable networks is falling every year. It's a failing industry, right? According to them. And they know there's no end in sight to that. Public investors want nothing to do with them. And they note that now that Comcast is doing it while others follow, one indicator may be the way Wall Street reacts to Wednesday's news. Comcast shares, which have been in the doldrum for years, perked up a bit in advance of the announcement. In other words, investors seem to like the idea. Get rid of those assets because that's just going to drag your whole company down. And interestingly, this is in addition to the extra legal headache happening right now. This didn't get a whole lot of coverage actually, but President-elect Donald Trump is saying that he plans to go after this whole so-called censorship cartel. We've been talking about this, but he's also suing a very large number of them for a lot of money. Trump is suing CBS News for $10 billion for allegedly deceptively doctoring their interview with Kamala Harris in a 60 Minutes interview. And Trump is also threatening lawsuits against a lot of others. Trump right now, he's demanding damages, $10 billion in damages, in fact, from the New York Times and Penguin Random House for alleged false and defamatory statements. In other words, news outlets that have been, again, saying nonstop negative things about Trump are now possibly facing legal action for defamation and so on because they've been doing this. And it doesn't end there either. The Washington Post was hit by a complaint made by the Trump campaign to the Federal Elections Commission a few weeks back, alleging that it made in-kind contributions to the Harris campaign with its promoted stories. And look, if you're a big company, you're publicly traded, what do you call that when some of your key assets could potentially face devastating lawsuits? $10 billion, for example, and are facing threats of investigation like with the censorship cartel allegations. All right, because we're seeing this from two different directions. They're being squeezed in two ways. On one side, of course, you have the regulatory bodies coming after them with this whole censorship cartel thing. You have them getting exposed, being involved in all this different kind of rigging of ad spaces and so on, some of these networks. And then in addition to that, you have the fact that people just don't watch them in general. Now, what do you call it if you're one of these big companies and you're looking to get rid of them, right? Well, you call these companies risks. And what do you do with that? Well, you look to risk manage this whole thing. And if those assets are already not doing well and they're also facing threats in the future, what do you do with that? Well, you might consider selling off those assets, or you might look into keeping them as far away from your profitable assets as possible, like putting them under a new company, which is what they're doing right now. But back to what's just happening on the front of news, right, with television. The other key issue the industry is facing is there's a shift taking place in the industry. Now, as we speak, online streaming is coming up. And this is despite the ongoing censorship we've been watching of online influencers. This shift could be similar to what happened in the newspaper industry when radio came about. Or it happened to news outlets when TV became a thing and people watched TV news. Now it's a new age. This is the age of online news media. And some outlets are trying to figure out how to weather this. Now, this is something interesting because we actually watched this begin to take place back in 2016, and the news media, the big corporate media, took actions to crush it, to stop it from growing, and they worked with big tech to do it. They could only keep it down for so long. Now, according to a new Pew Research Center report, they say about 1 in 5 U.S. adults, 21%, say they regularly get news from news influencers on social media. This is especially common, it says, among younger adults. 37% of those ages 18 to 29 say they regularly get news from influencers. But there are minimal differences, it says, between Republicans and Democrats on this question, meaning it's the same thing. It doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on. Now, interestingly as well, hosts on MSNBC's Morning Joe, when talking about this report, they had concerns about how they could weather this whole thing and become relevant again. Watch this.
I mean, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for a lot of mainstream media sources is, do they make themselves relevant again to here 20% of adults who actually get influencers on social media?
I don't know
maybe somebody who makes baskets, and while they're making baskets, they look up and say, vote for candidate X.
I don't know how we make ourselves relevant again, because we can't compete with 20-second snippets on an iPhone walking up the street.
Morsels.
Now, what's my personal take? I would personally say it's not that online influencers and independent voices are just suddenly taking away these audiences, right? It's that viewers get their news from what they recognize as truth. People want to watch things they agree with. They want to watch things that they can say, okay, I think this guy has it right. That's why people watch the news. Plenty of news outlets also have social media presences. Plenty of news outlets have short news clips and videos going around. In fact, I'd say most of these major networks, they all have that. It's not like they don't also have streaming. It's not like they're also on YouTube. It's not like they're also on X or TikTok or whatever else. They all have those presences. The issue, I think, meaning it's not just the platform, it's less about the format. The issue is on whether these outlets actually resonate with people and whether people actually trust them. And that's what they're losing. They've lost the trust. The platforms, I think, still work just fine, but people don't like them. That's the issue. Now, a big argument going around now is, how can the media be protected in this new era, right? How can the defenders of democracy keep the powers that be in check? That's the narrative going around. Well, the simple answer is this. Most of these media outlets talking about, socking it to the man, they're owned by some of the biggest corporations on earth. They are the man. They are what they say they're fighting against. They often have very public political bias as well. You're not the rebel if all you do is parrot the thing you're told to parrot. You're not the rebellious one if every single idea you have is the only idea you're told you're allowed to have and you're just parroting it. That doesn't make you, someone who's fighting the power or something like that. The ability to keep power in check, so to speak, often requires being free of special interest. And people are typically going to trust the voices they believe are the most honest and the least controlled. And that's the problem they're facing now, because they are controlled. Being a journalist, it used to be a blue-collar job. If you were a journalist in the past, it was not a good-paying job. Maybe in some places it still is not. That's the nature of journalism, right? Journalism was always bootstrap, on the ground, kind of dirty, gritty work. It was always like that. The corporate media, they have turned journalism into a white-collar job, locked away in the ivory tower and disconnected from the average person. It's by nature disconnected from them. But the new up-and-coming form of journalism, I would actually say, is actually more in line with the old-school journalism, this blue-collar, bootstrap journalism, and that's what people want. Many of these people are journalists, right? Not just online influencers as being framed as. And they seem to be winning the battle, interestingly, on public trust. And interestingly, I'd say on that note, let me know in the comments how you get your news. Do you watch me? Do you watch other people? Do you still watch cable TV news as well? Do you get your news mostly from social media or streamers? I guess I'm kind of a streamer, I guess. Leave your comments below. I'd be curious to find out. And folks, in other news, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has now been nominated to lead Health and Human Services. He's going to be in charge of the food and drugs and medical products and stuff in the United States, and pharmaceuticals and facial care products. All that stuff is going to be under him to an extent, about 80% of it. Now, he has publicly outlined a plan to go after what he regards as harmful chemicals and additives in our food. And we talked about this before, but now we're seeing the pushback. We're seeing the other side of it. Lobbyists from companies that could be affected by his plans, they're now working out how they can defend their products. This is Real Clear Investigations. They say this. They say America's most famous fast food fan may be an unlikely candidate to make America healthy again, but Donald Trump seems willing to tackle the eating habits that have led to skyrocketing rates of obesity. The junk food industry is not loving it, they say. Real Clear investigation has learned that representatives of companies that make snack food, sugary beverages, and cooking oils, like seed oils, are already meeting to discuss how to thwart the reform agenda of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Again, the former consumer rights attorney Trump has said he will nominate to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. And here's how it goes down. It says the response provides an early example of what experts predict will be a massive effort by D.C. lobbyists to position their clients, these big companies, in response to Trump's pledge to change how Washington does business. Now, the investigation notes some of the approaches the lobbyists are suggesting they could take to push back on this. Some of them are saying they could lobby members of Congress to limit what RFK Jr. can do. They want to make it so that Congress itself can maybe insert into funding bills or something like that, new definitions, new ways of going after things, and ways to protect from being, legislated or controlled different food products. It notes that the House Appropriations Committee, for example, before, they actually did this. They inserted a provision into federal funding before that redefined tomato paste on frozen pizza as a vegetable. And that was back in 2011 when the Obama administration was trying to get healthier lunches in schools. You might remember Michelle Obama had a whole initiative on that. It was Republicans on the House Appropriations Committee who countered it. And they suggested it wasn't the federal government's place to tell kids what to eat. Their action, when they inserted into this funding bill, this new definition, it was framed as them designating pizza as a vegetable. You might remember the headlines. Pizza is now a vegetable, right? Now, the request of those changes, they came through food companies, though, that produce frozen pizza for schools, the salt industry, and the potato growers, meaning it's the same thing they're trying to do now. It was the lobbyists trying to get this changed. Now, the lobbyists are also suggesting now that they could speak with individual senators who are going to have to vote to approve RFK Jr.'s nomination. And they want them to place some limits on his agenda as a condition to get their votes. Part of the deal making that's going to take place before he gets approved, if he gets approved. Now, in other news, a paper shredding truck was spotted outside the Department of Justice. And this is raising some concerns over the possible destruction of information. I'll be talking about this after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Well, folks, a paper shredding truck was photographed outside the Department of Justice building in Washington. And this is raising some concerns over whether they're destroying information. Because remember, there's the incoming Trump administration suggesting that they're going to be investigating the weaponization of justice and the handling of many cases, and they want these individuals to maintain all their records. And if they're maintaining their records, why is a shredding truck parked outside? Now, there's, of course, benign explanations for it. Maybe, for example, they're just destroying old documents that have nothing to do with these investigations, but it is raising some concerns. The Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation, they posted this on X. They've had a photo of it, and they said, we have maintained a physical investigative presence by the Justice Department, which also is more convenient for cooperating sources. Today, a paper shredding truck arrived. Now, Elon Musk, who's going to be part of the new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, he responded to that post with a simple Now, look, we don't know the context of this again. It is raising some concerns, though, given that Trump has nominated former Representative Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, and Gaetz is facing a lot of challenges to that right now, if you've maybe been watching, various ethics complaints and so on. Some people are saying, well, basically what's happening, they're suggesting that there are ethics complaints against Gaetz related to his relations with women. And people are pointing out that, well, most of Congress actually had a slush fund to deal with sexual harassment complaints. If you're going to release that on Gaetz, then release it on everyone. And they're suggesting they will not release it, but the media is still using it to undermine him, and also somehow a hacker allegedly was able to get the document, meaning the media might actually be reporting on it. But regardless of this, if Gaetz gets in, and maybe even if he doesn't, Trump has suggested that the Senate, move through with this, that he brings an end to what they call the weaponized government, the weaponization of justice. And some have suggested this could include investigations into the various charges that have been brought over the last few years against Donald Trump, Donald Trump's family, Donald Trump's businesses, members of his former administration, some of whom went to jail, and also a whole lot of Trump supporters, like the January 6ers. They want the Department of Justice to maintain their records so that they can carry out these investigations into any possible wrongdoing. Now, look, in other news, we're seeing the rise of a new social network. Online users who have been unhappy about the growing conservative voices on X, right under Elon Musk, they're now leaving for a new one. It's called Blue Sky. And this is causing something interesting. As they're leaving X, they're going to this other area, but I want to show you first off the overall shift. Now, this is Hollywood Reporter. They say a trickle is becoming a flood for Blue Sky, the social media company that has seen spectacular growth since the presidential election. On Tuesday, the microblogging platform hit 20 million users after averaging 1 million new users per day over the past 5 days. Now, said according to a November 13 post by Blue Sky CEO Jay Graber, the site had 6 million users in late August, nearly 11 million in late October, and had 15 million users on November 15th. It added another 5 million users in just 5 days. And with the explosive growth it's seen since November 5th, the day of the election, and accelerating since then. But here's the kicker on that. What happens, right? Pop quiz. What happens when people leave a platform because they're unhappy about what other people post there? If it's a social media and they decide to leave because they don't like what other people are saying and they feel there's not enough content moderation, well, the new platform is going to get those people. And those people are going to be the ones who want to see other people canceled or deplatformed or censored for what they say. And this is actually becoming the problem for Blue Sky now. Windbuzzer said, Blue Sky's swift rise to prominence has come with challenges, particularly in content moderation. Over 42,000 user complaints were filed within a 24-hour window from Thursday evening to Friday, posing a test to the platform's ability to manage such volume. Blue Sky's moderation team, now facing up to 3,000 reports per hour, is now being tested by this influx. These complaints range from spam and scams to severe issues involving child exploitation, prompting Blue Sky to adopt a triage strategy to address the most critical cases first. Now, note the exponential growth brought challenges in content moderation. In 2023, the platform processed around 360,000 user complaints overall, but only a small number of flagged accounts, less than 5,000, were suspended after review. This data underscores the challenges of effectively handling harmful behavior on a platform that continues to expand. The most recent surge in reports indicate, it says, a new level of pressure as the moderation system attempts to prioritize the most critical content. Now, of course, look, most smaller platforms, they tend to be forced into manual content moderation. You kind of can't get around it these days. If people make death threats, if people harass or threaten other users and they complain, and then sometimes you're legally liable to respond. You unfortunately can't get around some types of content moderation these days. It's the nature of it, and you can get sued otherwise, right? But what's been happening as well is some of the bigger platforms are just turning to AI and other tools. And when you start getting these large volumes of it, as we've seen with X, as we've seen with Facebook, they have to create censorship algorithms. And the big question of whether the platform maintains its openness as even functioning as a social media depends on how big they make those algorithms. X, notably, seems to have backed off on the censorship front, and they're more just focused on censoring criminal content. If it's not criminal, they don't ban it. It's basically their standard. These other platforms are kind of going the other way, where they're censoring all types of speech. Now, we'll see what effect there is on Blue Sky. This is kind of a new phenomenon with them. It could go either way. We'll have to wait and see. Now, folks, that said, leave your questions or comments in the chat. Hit the like button, and let's jump into some questions. Let's see here. Let's see. The one angel. You're saying, Josh, I love your thoughtful commentary and research. However, I disagree on banning any platform based on the algorithm. Firstly, because it will just surface elsewhere, but mainly because that in itself is a form of censorship. What we need is old-fashioned training parents on how to supervise kids, training kids on being alert and intelligent about what they watch, and how to spot warning signs in their friends. I believe you're talking about TikTok. You're saying, believe it or not, some of the worst mob mentality stuff and self-harm was way before the internet or TikTok. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I've gone back and forth with that too, because I don't think you're going to get rid of that kind of content by banning a platform. That is true. And I do think that if you do, you are right. You're totally right that if you go and look at the older internet, you would have some crazy stuff going around. I remember as a kid getting access to the internet, and there was no limit to what you just turn up when it was just totally unmoderated. It is true, actually. One of the challenges you also find, though, is you do also have bad actors who intentionally cause problems. And the concern I have with TikTok is the platform itself is controlled by a bad actor. It's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And there are ways that you can manipulate a platform is a type of weaponization to undermine the values of a society. My personal concern with TikTok is it's not an actual open platform. It is a deeply controlled, deeply moderated platform that intentionally, I believe, based on the CCP's agendas, could show things to people based on the algorithms that promote self-harm. And that's different from just having a platform where it's organic, right? Where, for example, it just randomly might show up because it just so happens that someone posted something, versus intentionally serving you this stuff. Some of the studies I've read about what they found with the algorithms with TikTok. Remember, the CCP has a different version in China. The version in China doesn't do this. Only the version outside of China does this. They have a different name for it in China. They were finding that kids who are using it, you're just maybe, you like something and it has maybe some, maybe it's about self-care or about self-help. And rather than the algorithm sending you stuff that's maybe positive or uplifting or whatever else, because it is curated. The way the algorithms work is it's curated. They will send kids things that promote suicide. They will actually promote suicide to these kids. And so if you have a kid, and it is true, I think that you should teach your kids how to deal with this stuff. I'm a parent. I have a philosophy. I have my own philosophy on raising kids. With my daughter, she's 14 years old. She's not on social media at all. I got her a Gab phone. It does not have internet or social media. It has music streaming, but it's curated. It's only positive stuff. She's been okay with that. And I talked to her about how these platforms work. She actually does not have a good impression when she's hanging out with her friends and their faces are buried in their phones. She really doesn't like it. And so because I raised her in such a way to not like those things, it's not that big of a deal for her. She does have a laptop that she needs for homeschool. So, she does have access to this stuff if she really wants to. But generally speaking, because I've raised her in such a way that I've taught her about the dangers of these things and what actually happens, it hasn't been a problem. My other theory with parenting is that my thinking is this: everything kind of has a space. And if you don't teach your kids something, somebody else will. If you don't teach your kids about what they're going to be facing with this crazy gender stuff, someone else will. If you don't teach your kids about what communism is and why it's bad and how it works, someone else will. If you don't teach them about all the stuff they're going to encounter in the rest of the world, somebody else is going to fill that gap. And I believe that whoever gets there first is the one who kind of maintains the narrative on how to defend against it. And so it's worked pretty well for me with my form of parenting. And so I do agree with you that you should actually teach kids. The problem is you have not a lot of parents are on the ball with their kids. And a lot of kids are actually just kind of left to their own whims when it comes to weathering these things. And the school systems are not teaching them very good things with it either. I've actually gotten some of the curriculum they show in like sex ed in schools. They talk about what they call comprehensive sex ed. Comprehensive meaning they show them everything. And not only do they show them everything, but they normalize it. They make it so that normal human relationships are presented the same as the most debased fetishes you could possibly imagine. Stuff I'd never even heard of before. And I'm a 40-year-old man, you know what I mean? Stuff I had never heard of before, they're teaching kids and they're normalizing it. Now, I would agree that this stuff is out there, and I would agree with you that, I don't know if getting rid of a whole platform just because of that is the way to do it. Because they're going to encounter it regardless, and if you don't teach your kids well, they're going to find it regardless. That is a total reality. My personal stance with TikTok, though, is it's CCP controlled, and I don't think they have a good motive with it, right? I think the CCP's involvement behind the scenes makes it dangerous. I know you could say that about a lot of things, just my personal opinion. I do think that if they sold it off, though, which is one of the options they were presented with, right? They were presented basically with, okay, you sell it off, you have it not be run under any kind of Chinese CCP connected things, then it's okay. I think if they did that, then maybe it'd be fine, personally. But I mean, I can see your perspective as well. I'm not like a hard line on these things. Moldegard, you're saying, I remember being told as a child that you can't believe everything you see on TV. Now it seems many people do believe everything they see on TV. Yeah, not only do they believe everything they see on TV, but they're told to not question it, right? These days it's, trust the science, trust the experts. You are not an expert. You should trust the experts. Even when I was a kid, we were taught, you can't believe everything you see on TV. And I think that people have somewhat lost the ability of independent thinking, or maybe some people. I do think you have seen, let's put it this way. COVID-19, you saw a lot of people push back against prevailing narratives, despite the fact that those prevailing narratives blanketed everything. It was all you could see on social media. It was all you could see on television. It was all you could see in most of the print media. And still, people could see outside of it. How were they able to see outside of it if every single mainstream source was parroting the same narrative and telling you that everything else was a conspiracy theory? How was it that people had the other viewpoints? It's because people are capable of independent thought. And so you definitely did have a lot of people who just went and believed everything they were told, and maybe some of them had a wake-up call when they realized a lot of what they were told was actually false, especially when they said, hey, 100% safe and effective, just one shot. 100% safe and effective, 2 shots. 100% safe and effective, 2 shots and a booster, then 2 boosters, then 3 boosters, then 4 boosters, then indefinite boosters. And it's not safe, by the way. But still get it because it's safer than facing the virus. And it's not 100% effective either. It's kind of effective, but you need to keep getting it for the rest of your life. I think people who went through that chain of events maybe began questioning, well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? Why didn't you tell me about some of the risks to pregnant women? And I do know a lot of people who were injured by these things. That is the reality. I think people are starting to recognize that. And so ironically, that was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people. James Dyson is saying, Josh, if you see two men sitting next to a pond with fishing poles, are they fishing? Either that or they're plotting, or they're, I don't know. yeah, usually, right? You can put two and two together and typically figure out what people are doing. I believe you're referring, of course, to what we're watching in terms of, actually, I don't know which story you're referring to, but my assumption is you're referring to, well, you know, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. That is true, right? Yeah, I'm watching the chats as well, folks. Let's see here, realitysreal.com. You're saying the purpose of government is to keep things from racing out of control, like the government mechanism on a car engine. Yeah, you know, and I'm the kind of guy who I tend to not like over control, but I do think you need some of it. For example, I was talking the other day about the food additives, and I do find it, you know, look, I kind of grew up in a healthy household. My dad was very big on health food. We ate a lot of organic food. We tended to not eat a lot of processed food. And I was raised in such a way where, you know, we kind of avoided that stuff. We knew it was unhealthy. You know, I grew up partly in Costa Rica, like living in the jungle and in the Osa Peninsula, actually, which is a little more built up now. But when I was there, we lived on the very boundary of civilization. So the pure jungle was just, you know, a 5-minute walk from us. And behind our house was just pure jungle, actually. Well, actually all around us, but there was a civilization completely ended very close to us. And so there was no more roads or anything like that. It was like that. I grew up living kind of in the wild like that, doing partly homeschool. I'm not Costa Rican, by the way. My dad was a big surfer, and so we'd spend some time like every winter down there, and I'd do homeschool. We'd live in the jungle. And so growing up, I had kind of a very health-minded upbringing. We had totally self-sustained land. My dad made it so that he planted fruit trees all over the place, and you could basically live off the land and from fishing. We didn't really need anything outside of that. We had a full-blown plumbing system that we built, full-blown solar power we built. You know, we were totally off-grid living in the jungle, like, you know what I mean? And so I kind of grew up like that. I mean, and I grew up in a few different places, but I grew up not liking a lot of this artificial stuff. That's just kind of my upbringing. Now, when it comes to the chemicals and stuff in food, which I do tend to avoid, I'm not like a hardliner on it. I'll still eat I'll eat whatever if I really have to. I don't really care. But I do avoid it if I have a choice. My thinking and what I've been seeing, is that if you let these big businesses do things that are harmful to people, if it is profitable, and if people will still buy it, a lot of them will do it. I would like to imagine that everybody is just honest in this world and everybody cares about human rights and so on, but they're not like that. This is the reason why you have like child slave labor in cobalt mines making the parts for your smartphone, right? It's because companies will abuse people and enslave people if it's legal. If they can do it, they'll do it. This is the reason why most of the garment industry, at least it used to, uses slave cotton from China, mostly harvested by Muslim Uyghurs. And isn't it ironic? You have like these NBA players kneeling, you know, with the American anthem, but they're wearing shoes made from like child slave labor in China, ironically from cotton, like slave cotton. It does not sound familiar to this day. I think I see it the same way with some of the chemicals in the foods. They will put chemicals in American food that is known to be harmful in other countries, where in Europe they ban it. In Europe, in Australia, in Canada, they might ban some of these things because studies have shown the harmful effects of it, but they'll still put it in our food because it's not banned and because it's cheaper, right? It's better for profit margins. I do think that regulation is needed in areas like this, because while I would like to believe that everybody is good-hearted and would not do things that would harm people, some of them will. And that's been something I've had to kind of recognize in the world getting older. There are people like that. And sometimes they don't even put two and two together that they're doing it. But there are people like that. And so I do think some regulation is necessary. I don't fully agree with the whole anarcho-capitalist view. You could argue I do have more I'd say I have conservative values, but I'm more like libertarian, where I kind of say I'm kind of like a live and let live kind of guy. I don't believe in forcing my values on other people or anything like that. I'll talk about them, but I don't force them on people. But I do think anarcho-capitalism, if you just have no regulation whatsoever and let businesses do whatever they want, they will do things as badly as they can, as long as people buy it, if it's good for profits. And there are just people like that in this world. And I do think because of that, we do need some regulation on it. And I also think you have people who do it intentionally sometimes. The drug trade, for example, and the Chinese Communist Party's involvement with fentanyl, for example, that is a great point with it, that people will actually sell poison. They'll kill 200,000 Americans, and they'll still sell it because it's profitable and because it can undermine their competitor, the United States. You have this kind of nation-state level fighting that is kind of outside this entire spectrum. On the point of TikTok, while I do understand the views of not banning it, I'm not a hardliner on this at all. But I do see it as being part of this whole CCP system designed to attack and undermine the United States. And I see it as just a tool in that broader picture, personally. Flying Squirrel, you're saying, this week CCP cut fiber optic cables in the Baltic Sea. Russia dropped an MIR-VED ICBM in Ukraine. Do America's foes see a strategic window before President Trump returns to office? Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk about this. I was going to do it tomorrow. Maybe I still will. So basically, an underwater internet cable was randomly cut in the Baltic Sea. The initial suspicions were that Russia did it, because Russia, and I know that China's involvement. The story was this. Russia had right before that made a vague threat saying that undersea internet cables could be cut. And then suddenly an internet cable was cut. What was discovered soon after was a Chinese vessel was in that area at the time it was cut, and they believe the Chinese vessel cut it. That's where the story's at. There's plausible deniability. It does look like the CCP did it. Why is that concerning? It's because cutting off internet access and electricity, attacking power stations, is becoming a new form of warfare. You could argue that during World War II, we saw things like this, where there was economic warfare, the bombing of factories and so on. There was warfare in the form of trying to shut off the power in certain areas. These days, shutting off the internet is something that can shut off the economy. The Chinese Communist Party has been talking about doing this as an attack strategy against Taiwan, for example, cutting all the cables around it, destroying their economy, and then maintaining a naval blockade so those can't be repaired. And again, destroying them like a castle siege. You starve them out and then make them come to the negotiating table. That is being talked about. So the CCP allegedly being involved with the cutting of the cable in the Baltic Sea is seen in this regard, right? It's also true that Russia just launched an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. They fired it into Ukraine. The reports I saw say that they don't know what it targeted, and they don't know if it actually destroyed anything. But the launching of an ICBM is a very big threat, because you can put a nuclear warhead on those. Now you can put non-nuclear warheads on an ICBM also. Like remember in Desert Storm when Saddam Hussein was launching like Scud missiles and America was like intercepting the Scud missiles. Those were ballistic missiles. That was like one of the greatest moments in like pro-America time, right? People were just intercepting the Scud missiles, were cheering. They had Top Gun, the movie, in the theaters around that time, right? That was a very fist-pumping pro-America time for us. Those were Scud missiles. My point is, you can arm them with things other than nuclear warheads. Russia doing this right now, though, is in light of Ukraine now getting permissions of long-range missile strikes into Russia, the permission for that being given by the Biden administration. And Russia has been saying that that's a red line. Russia's saying that if they do that, they will respond with nuclear attacks. Will they do that when Trump's probably going to get into office very soon, January 20th, and will very likely bring a very rapid end to the war? I don't know. But what we could see is a very rapid escalation. I don't think, in terms of rational calculation, that Russia would want to do any large-scale nuclear attack. There is the possibility they could use very large bombs short of nuclear weapons, or even maybe a strategic nuclear weapon with a smaller blast in Ukraine. They could do that. But what they want to have right now is assets for negotiation. The way I see this escalation happening right now is that when they come to the negotiating table, whoever has the advantage is going to be the one who has the most cards to play on getting something out of the negotiations. If you want to negotiate, there has to be an exchange. And if you have nothing to exchange, you're going to lose. That's the way negotiations work. So Ukraine right now, they're trying to up the ante. They're trying to expand this whole thing. They're trying to say, we have something to bring to the table. We're not just on the offense, we're not just on the defense, we're on the offense. Russia's saying, well, if you want to play that game, we're going to meet you there and exceed you. And so they're talking about launching very large-scale attacks in a much more aggressive way because both of them need to have an advantage when it comes to the negotiations, which will very likely start once Trump comes in. That's where things are heading. As this happens, you have countries all around Europe preparing for war. Germany is preparing for war. They're rallying up for it. Sweden is preparing for war. They're even sending out pamphlets telling people to get ready for it. Some of the other countries, I believe Finland as well, and a couple others, they're rallying for war. And the way it's looking right now is if this does not get stopped, this will be a broader war. This will be a world war. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Because already you have North Korea involved, already you have China involved in the Eastern theater, already you have Russia involved, and if all of NATO gets involved as well, that pulls them into it. You already have war in the Middle East, Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, the whole 9 yards. The International Criminal Court actually just made arrest warrants out for Netanyahu in Israel and for the heads of Hamas. That's going to turn into a big war if you don't stop it as well. That's also going to break Western ties probably with the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And so this is the shakeup we're watching right now. When people watch this, they're like, well, why is this all happening right now? Like, why is it right before Trump gets in and he's saying he's going to bring an end to these things that people are just hitting the gas, basically? And they're wondering, what are you guys trying to start World War III here? What are you doing? Take it for what you will. My personal interpretation is they're trying to gain upper hands for negotiations. That's the way I personally view it. But on the other side of it, I know that the CCP, for example, they want to take Taiwan by 2027. They want to be able to wage war against the United States by 2027. And so on their side as well, there's not an interest in ending the war, at least not on anything that would benefit the West. So this could get worse. It is very possible this could get worse. But we'll see how it unfolds. Let's see here. Wall rail going to DEI. You're saying ESG, we force behaviors, yeah. Environmental and social governance. And actually on that note, when I was talking about corporations, look, I'm not like anti-business. I'm very much a capitalist. But I do believe that monopoly in business is no better than monopoly in government. I'm anti-monopoly. I don't believe in one centralized system dominating everybody else. And what we've seen with ESG is that shareholders and banks and activist groups working with foreign governments have been able to create laws that dictate the behavior of Americans in ways that our government cannot legally do because of the Constitution. We've seen that we've been basically forced to abide by speech laws, by like thought laws, by environmental laws, by weird social laws, all these different very extreme standards that have been implemented over the last several years. A lot of this has not been through government. A lot of it has been through the corporate space. It's being done through the media. It's being done through social media. It's being done through search engines. It's being done in the form of deplatforming. It's being done by the media in the form of targeting people, defaming people, and getting them fired from their jobs if they dare challenge it. And that has had the effect of putting us under laws that are not laws. We're living under a type of totalitarianism. In other words, not enforced by government, at least not in the United States, but instead that's being enforced by the big corporations. Like we're living under the censorship heel of Google and Facebook and stuff like that. At least we were. A lot of this stuff was not being enforced through the government, right? And that goes back to my point that, you know, you can live under totalitarianism in many forms. I've mentioned before that communism itself is not strictly about government level communism, which would be socialism. You have syndicalism, which is through the unions. You have the technocrats looking to do it through like big corporations and stuff. You have all kinds of variants of it and different degrees of it. And if you let third-party bodies like activist organizations dictate these systems that have monopolies over key parts of your life, modern business, free speech, and the way the economy works, and again, it's being controlled by these activist organizations who can use these things to do it. You're living under a totalitarian system through these monopolies. And I do think that now that it's being overturned, we're watching the other side of it. The good thing with the free market is that if you don't like something, you can boycott it. And we have actually witnessed that happen. A lot of people, especially in the United States, have begun boycotting brands that support this stuff. And because of that, I believe we've actually seen people move away from it. We've seen a lot of these businesses are dropping a lot of these initiatives and narratives because people will bankrupt them and they won't buy their products if they keep pushing it. It's been a really interesting phenomenon to watch. Judy Akeem, you're saying, Josh, food producers also go for hypersensory experiences where the product is vibrant and shiny and has an engineered taste that hits the brain exactly right. They do anything to make their food addictive. Yeah, I've read some interesting reports on that too. The coloring actually does have a weird impact on the human eye. Smartphones work the same way, by the way. There's also some people who do like, kid video content that works on that spectrum as well. There's different types of junk food. There's junk food for the stomach and there's junk food for the brain, right? It is true that a lot of these companies will study addictive behaviors and they will try to create addictive products with the purpose of making people desire them. Now, on one side, you could say, well, who cares? Obviously, if you make a product, you want to make that product sell as well as possible. There's a boundary between creating a good product that sells well and creating a product that's designed to be as addictive as possible, even if it means harming a person. And I think that's where you get into like these mind control techniques in advertising and stuff. If you go back and read propaganda by, I believe, Bernays, for example. Or read, for example, some of the early writings about, for example, Pavlov's dog and studies on social conditioning. They've done experiments on human manipulation that, people talk about government level human manipulation stuff like, MK Ultra, which there are documents on it. It's real stuff, by the way. But they also have the same things working in the advertising space. They also have the same things working in the product space. They have the same thing working on addictive behaviors on social media, the same thing working on addictive assets and colors and stuff with smartphones and video games. A lot of these things do play into addiction, and they manipulate the things that the human nature has a very hard time resisting in order to get you addicted to these products and to make it affect you in such a way where you can't resist it. I think that level of manipulation crosses a certain line, and I don't agree with what it's doing. Now, what do you do with that, though? What do you do with that? How do you regulate that? I don't know. On social media, in some countries, they are looking to go after some of these addictive algorithms, for example. I know in Europe they're going after that quite a bit. Some of the big data gathering that allow them to do micro-targeting of people based on what they might be sensitive and vulnerable to. There are things like this. And, I think we're kind of at the beginning of this debate, not the end of it. And so I do think we're going to be seeing a lot more on this. But as Judith notes, yeah, the food does that as well. And, it encourages snacking, for example, because let's put it this way. How many of you have eaten very good chocolate, very high quality chocolate? You'll find that if you eat a small piece, you're typically satisfied. You don't want to eat an entire bar of good quality chocolate. You might not even want to, right? And the reason is because it satisfies you. If you were to buy a junk food candy bar and do that, you would find that you want to keep eating it until you eat the entire thing. And the reason is because it doesn't satisfy you. A lot of food is made to make you keep eating it because it does not give the satisfaction that more natural foods might have. And it does make you overeat because of that. The reason is because it's been engineered that way. It's the same thing with a lot of potato chips, same thing with a lot of other junk foods and candy and so on. It's designed to make you continue eating and not have a sense of satisfaction, which is crazy when you think about it, right? Let's see here. Helena Lewis, you're saying, Josh, in your opinion, will RFK Jr. really be able to make our foods healthier, or will he have too many roadblocks? I personally think he'll be able to do it if he gets in. The big issue will be getting around the Senate approvals. The Senate is not going to be able to block all of Trump's appointees. They're going to have to be selective with it. Now, in terms of the ones they least want in, they're probably going to try to block Gates to the Attorney General position the most, and they're now starting to come out with narratives against RFK Jr. Also, sexual scandal allegations. They're calling it Brett Kavanaugh, Part 2, where you might remember when Brett Kavanaugh was being appointed to the Supreme Court, they fabricated all kinds of stories about him. They turned out to be fake, but they fabricated those stories with the purpose of trying to get him not approved at the Supreme Court. We've watched this. I think the average American at this point is numb to it. I think most of us don't even care because we've been watching alleged scandals like this nonstop, and 9 times out of 10, they're either fake or exaggerated. And we're numb to it. I don't think people care anymore. But they will definitely try to make a moral panic and moral outrage to try to block them from getting in. Trump has suggested he might be able to get around this, notably, because Trump is saying he could actually put the Senate on recess and then just force them through, which legally the president can do, by the way. But it would only be a 1-year window until they would have to have the official Senate appointments. But 1 year might be long enough for them to go through and achieve what they want to achieve anyway, so we'll see. Point is, they're saying, Trump is basically telling the Senate, approve them or I have other ways, which is, again, putting them on recess and then using a presidential action to force them through. That is an existing power, by the way. Let's see, Donnie Newman, you're saying Jaguar went woke. I saw that. Jaguar had a very strange commercial which got a lot of people very unhappy. They're calling it Bud Light Part 2, or Bud Light 2.0. Yeah, the auto company claimed the story is still unfolding in response to the backlash. Yeah, the slogan that's been going around is "Get woke, go broke," and the reality is a lot of people don't want this stuff. This stuff doesn't resonate with people, and people don't like it. It is likely that Jaguar just ruined their cool image. Jaguar used to have a cool image. I don't know about that now. But they're reeling from the effects of that, it seems. They probably will have to see how it affects the car sales, because you're talking about luxury cars. No, heck, we'll see. Folks, that said, join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Always a pleasure talking with you all. Please share this video, like this video. In terms of, hey, speaking of algorithms and stuff on YouTube, liking a video helps us a lot. So please don't forget to like the video. That said, always, thank you so much for being here, folks. I appreciate all of you. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.